Good evening and welcome to Cornerstone for this night of wisdom conversations. I think it's going to be so amazing. First, let's all bow our heads in prayer. Lord, thank you for bringing us together tonight for this special place and this special evening. You, God, are the great teacher, and we ask your Spirit to be present tonight in this conversation. We know, Lord, that great wisdom comes from you and you alone. We love you and we are humbled by your attentiveness to our desire to be more like you. We ask your blessing upon the attendees tonight in this room and the speakers who are here to share with us. We pray for a strong and robust conversation that leads to stronger faith, stronger families, and a widespread sharing of the gospel. We pray tonight in your Son, Jesus' name, amen. All right, so you probably all know me from political stuff and conversations that I have, but I'm also excited because I'm grateful to not only be in that world, but also here at Cornerstone University as one of the President's Fellows here. And that is a group of national leaders who want to help the next generation of Cornerstone students graduate as bold influencers for Christ, as you just saw in that video. Tonight, we're here to talk about that conversation, how to be a bold influencer for Christ, and we're here to talk about family, something that is incredibly important to me because I have 4 children of my own. My family is what I see as the future, and I think you'll hear that tonight from the speakers. Earlier, we got to hear just a small part of what they want to talk about tonight, and I'm here to tell you that it's going to be a great conversation. I think there's going to be a lot of boldness in discussion, pushing back on some of the societal messages that young people are getting today that tend to be focused on, you don't need this, it's me-focused, self-focused. And I think tonight you're going to hear the importance of being family-focused and being Christ-focused and being able to go out there and speak those messages boldly to others. So I'm pleased that you are here tonight. I'm hopeful that you walk away from this evening with a renewed commitment to those conversations and you're able to continue those conversations. Tonight, I have the joy of introducing and the honor of introducing our moderator for tonight's panel, someone who's been a mentor to me, who has had many conversations with me, has been on my podcast, and I think someone who is incredibly important to all of you, Dr. Jersan Moreno-Riaño. President Moreno, he has served as the president of Cornerstone University with a scholarly and academic background at the University of Cincinnati, focused on the history of political philosophy and political theology and ethics. Recently, he's been featured in several national publications and media outlets such as Fox News, The Washington Post, The Hill, and right here, the Detroit News. He'd be speaking about the importance of colleges and universities and preparing that next generation to be morally grounded leaders and skilled and good citizens, starting in their families and their homes. He has been engaging college students on challenging topics for more than 25 years, and he and his wife have raised 6 children of their own. So please welcome Dr. Moreno-Riaño to the stage this evening.
Tudor, thank you. I'm already here. Thank you, Tudor. Thank you. Thank you, Tudor, for being a part of our university and President's Fellows. Thank you all for being here this evening. Welcome to our Wisdom Conversations. I especially want to give a tremendously warm welcome to all of our students who are here. Cornerstone students, yes, you're all throughout. Thank you for being here this evening as well. It's great to have you. I know you can be many places, but thank you for being here. I also want to thank our trustees who are here. Trustees of the board, would you please stand so we can thank you for your support of our university and love our university. There are a number of you out here. Thank you, Steve, Dave. Thank you for being here. Thank you. An event of this magnitude could not be done without the wonderful Cornerstone University team. They're all throughout this place, helping, supporting, helping us. In particular, Christina Garverling, she's hiding somewhere. She told me if I would say her name, she'd be somewhere hiding. But would you please join me in thanking the Cornerstone University faculty and staff and for all their support and help. Thank you. We begin a very important conversation. I want to introduce our panelists to you, and then once I do that, I will also make some comments. It's my honor to introduce our distinguished guests. You have their bios in your programs and full of incredible accomplishments. First, I want to introduce the National Director of Outreach for Moms for Liberty, a businesswoman, journalist, political commentator, recognized as a leading Latina voice in the U.S. and abroad. Her work in advancing family values and transparency in education has been featured in Spanish and English language media across the world. She's a trilingual mother of 4, a former Miss World Colombia, and she inspires parents nationwide with a commitment to God, family, and country. Will you please join me in welcoming Catalina Stube to the podium. Thank you, Catalina. Next is the co-founder of Vertex Partnership Academies, a network of character-based public charter schools in the Bronx. And he's also serves as a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He's also a Cornerstone's National Presence Fellow and a Golden Eagle Partner. His leadership in education and character formation has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and other national outlets. He's also the author of a very important book entitled Agency, the 4-Point Plan for all children to overcome the victimhood narrative and discover their pathway to power. Would you please join me in welcoming Mr. Ian Rowe? And Ian, this is your second wisdom conversation. Thank you. Thank you for coming back. Next, our next speaker is a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, D.C., where his work with the Life and Family Initiative focuses on developing a robust pro-family economic agenda. His writings have been featured in the New York Times, Political, National Review, and the Washington Post. He speaks across college campuses and on Capitol Hill on welfare reform, child care, and education policy. Would you please join me in welcoming Mr. Patrick Brown? And lastly, our last speaker for the evening serves as a senior fellow emeritus at the American Enterprise Institute, and she's a nationally recognized scholar on gender and free expression. She's the author of several influential books, including The War Against Boys, Who Stole Feminism, and she's widely known as the factual feminist. Dr. Summers' commentary has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, the Washington Post, and she's a frequent guest on national and radio programs. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Christina Hoff Summers. Thank you all for participating. I want to share with the audience before we get started the genesis for this topic. This is now our 8th Wisdom Conversations. We started in the spring of 2022. So grateful for our university, the support of our board, the support of generous donors who are here this evening who support this event. Thank you to each of you. This event is near and dear, I think, to all of our hearts. I will tell you where it began for me when I encountered a number of young people who would come to our home, guests of one of our children, and I would hear them speak about family or they make comments about family, and I realized the great need we have in our communities here in West Michigan, throughout the country, to talk about family, the condition of our families. What can we do to support and strengthen our families? And this really came to heart when I would hear or they would share the brokenness in their own families, the hopelessness in their own families. And it moved me deeply. And I remember speaking to my dear wife, who's here with me this evening. Ellen, thank you for being here. And my children, my daughter from DC, and my son. But I remember mentioning to my wife, I think we need to do a family issue, a family theme on Wisdom Conversations. Because my sense is that this is happening across the country, across our communities, across our churches, that our families are in deep need of support and help and guidance. Thus this conversation, and once again, would you please join me in thanking our panelists as we tackle a very, very serious topic. So thank you to each of you for being here. Ian, this is your second one. Thank you for joining us. I want to ask you, and Dr. Sandler, we'll start with you, maybe a 2-minute intro as to why this topic, why is this so important for you, and why this evening?
Well, good evening. I'm Christina Hoff Summers from the American Enterprise Institute. Before that, I taught philosophy for 20 years. I was a tenured professor at Clark University, and before that, Brandeis University. And in my teachings, I was teaching ethics. And a lot of the readings it was very popular at that time to do contemporary moral dilemmas. And so we would basically debate the moral obligations of organizations. And we talked a lot about sort of social policies. What should the government do? What should agencies do? And there was very little about personal morality. And I thought, well, but that's something that young people care about and would be interested in. But and I wrote a paper called Ethics Without Virtue, because there was very little focus on right and wrong, good and evil, personal obligation, the well-lived life. These social policy questions were sort of deferring morality to agencies. And then I went a little further and realized that there were a lot of confusing messages about right and wrong and the good life, that students really weren't being exposed to, let's say, arguments in favor of a traditional lifestyle. I knew as a feminist, and I'd read the feminist philosophy, all the arguments against the family, and it's the bedrock of the patriarchy, and it reinforces stereotypes. But what about the good things that are in the family, and it can be improved? But the argument seemed to be that it was taken for granted, that we needed an alternative. And I found very few readings just in favor of it as a place that had been, going back to Aristotle, was seen as a place of where it's sort of where a school of, as Aristotle said, a school of ethics. That's where you learn right and wrong. It's where you have the intimate loyalty and connection. And just seemed to be obvious that that's the basis for a well-lived life. But again, this wasn't in part of the ethics curriculum at the time. I guess it isn't even today. So there was so much sort of denigration, either ignoring or neglecting personal morality, or challenging basic precepts of how to live one's life, that I began to be a voice for moderation. So I started criticizing the way ethics was taught and thought there should be more emphasis on personal morality. And I began questioning this sort of hardline feminist view that I thought was kind of deterring a lot of young women from marriage. There was this idea that men were toxic rather than looking at the positive side of masculinity. And it just tried to make the case. And that's what I've been doing for all these years.
Great. Thank you, Christina. Patrick.
Well, thank you, President Gerson. Thank you, Cornerstone, for hosting us on, I think, the most important topic that we're going to face in the rest of the 21st century, the rest of the lives of all the students here, the rest of us on this panel. We're facing a crisis, not just in the United States, across the West, across the world. People aren't having babies, they aren't getting married, they're not forming families. And that's going to lead to so much social isolation, alienation, polarization, so many of the things that we've seen take over our politics over the last 10, 20 years that have made it feel like we're living through a national divorce in a sense, stems from the breakdown of the family. I used to work on Capitol Hill, and when you look at the long run demographic trends, right, what the consequences are of people not having kids, they're economic, they're, they have national security implications, but beyond whatever you can control for in spreadsheets, it's cultural, right? It's an expression that people no longer have the confidence, or they're scared to take that plunge, to commit to someone, to take that plunge of creating a new life together. And so if we're not able to grapple with what we can do in our own roles, our own responsibilities, our own vocations, wherever we are in life, and also what we can do together through communal organizations, through the state, through schools and other institutions, to make marriage and family more affordable, more achievable, more desirable, that's going to be the biggest question that we have to grapple with, because without that, so many other social pathologies start to exemplify it, as we'll talk about. So many other costs are associated with that. To me, if you're not talking about family, you're missing a huge part of the picture of what's gone wrong in America.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. Ian.
Well, President Moreno, thank you once again for the honor of being here at Cornerstone. And when you ask, what brings me here, the truth is, I can't imagine not being here for the opportunity to speak about the centrality of family. As you said, I'm both a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and I've also run public charter schools in the Bronx in New York City for 15 years. So I really come with two hats tonight. There's kind of my data, policy, wonk, research hat. And in that world, there is increasing recognition of the importance of marriage and family to a host of social outcomes for children. We just finished a study for Governor Youngkin in Virginia. It was about fatherhood, but one of the things we found was that there were no differences in the percentage of kids that get A's and B's, no differences between black and white kids when you looked at kids of married in households, suggesting that family structure is a far more determinative factor than even things like race that we typically focus on, or the fact that poverty rates within black married couples have been in the single digits for decades. So just increasing recognition that there's powerful information. I'm sure we'll talk about when you look at the numbers, why family matters and marriage. But I also run schools. And so every day I see the very human impact of when children are being raised in difficult environments. And we can spend a lot of time on the numbers, but we can never lose sight of the role that marriage and family play in human flourishing and the transmission of moral values for the rising generation. And so I'm really excited to be here tonight, not only talk about the importance of family, but how to help more young people understand that one of the fundamental decisions that they make in their lives that connected to their possibilities of happiness is connected directly to the decisions around marriage and family within their own lives.
Thank you, Ian. Catalina.
Well, first of all, thank you, President Moreno, for your invitation. I feel so proud to have two Colombians here. I hope we are not the only Colombians here.
It's hard for this place to contain two Colombians, I will tell you right now. So, Catalina, thank you.
This topic is really close to my heart, not only because family is the God's design for humanity and to the continuation of humanity, but also when you see, for example, in my family back in Colombia, my grandparents had 8 kids. And then my mom had 2 kids, and I had 3 kids, but now my daughter doesn't want to have kids. Something is missing. And I don't think we can just blame one pillar of our society in that case, because I work with education. I cannot say it is only the fault of the educational system, which is failing right now to our kids, but I think it's definitely a mix of all the pillars that are getting down right now. The pillar of entertainment, which is influencing obviously our children, our culture. The pillar of health. The pillar of the justice, the justice system. I mean, every single pillar in the United States has been touched to denigrate the family, to put at peril our family, to actually not considering the family as a priority. And this is why we are seeing this society so divided, as you said, Patrick said, is divided, is failing, its education is failing for our children. So definitely it's one of the most important topics right now to address and definitely to defend. We should be, all of us, talking about defending the family institution, talking about defending our American values, talking about defending my own family, my own children, and the education of our children.
Karina, thank you. And I want to share with you and with the audience a book that I wrestled with, and I shared with you a little bit in the green room, this book, and I want to share with our audience and our students. And it's a book that's relatively unknown a book that was written by a sociologist named Carl Zimmerman. He was one of the founding sociologists at Harvard in the 1930s, founding the sociology department there. And his masterwork that has basically been sort of put in the back shelf somewhere was entitled Family and Civilization. I just want to share with you the very important book, Family and Civilization. He made this profound argument, and I think we've touched on it a little bit, so I want us to talk a little more about this. He argues that throughout history, the decline of any civilization is always preceded by the decline of the family. That's his thesis. That's his theory. I want us to park there for a moment. The decline of any civilization is always preceded by the decline of the family. And he argues that, well, in the ancient Greek time, Romans, Middle Ages, you name it, you can always see the decline of the family and then the decline of the civilization, right? So it's not as if this is the first time this is happening. That's my point. This issue of familial decline, potential civilizational decline, I think there's a lot of evidence for it throughout centuries of history. So it's not our first go around. So my question for us to think about is, why are we here? Why are we having this conversation? And I'll share one more thing he says. He said that usually when societies begin to talk about the family in danger, he said it's almost too late. And he cites examples from centuries of individuals, leaders throughout society who would see family breakdown, begin to talk about it, and then the breakdown happened of the whole civilization. He said it was almost too late when you start talking about it. I'm hoping that's not the case, but it's a very important questions for us. So why do you think, all of you, why are we having this intense conversation? That what's brought us to this point? And I say as an immigrant, 45 years in this country, and I never thought we'd be having this conversation.
Well, there's been so much negativity about the family. And if kids in school study sex education and they learn about contraception and how to avoid getting pregnant, that's all well and good, but maybe those classes should also have some information about family life and how what's known as the success sequence. If you stay in school and you get married and then have children, do it in that order, your chances of doing well are pretty high. And if young people were given a positive image, where you see so much negativity in the media, in popular culture, they rewrite the fairy tales in ways which make them suit some sort of very narrow political script, and I think we have to enhance the script. And I'm not too pessimistic, because human beings are adaptable and can change, and I think that's why it's important to get this information out there.
There's definitely a cultural element to it. I just don't want to downplay that. I think we'll be focusing on that a lot tonight. But there's also an economic aspect too. Family has a lot of different dimensions, right? There used to be an economic benefit to getting married as well as a social one. It used to be the only place where you could have a socially sanctioned cohabitation, a reliable sexual partner, having kids. Like, a lot of these things were sort of bundled up in marriage that now we've sort of disaggregated. You can, have all those things on the open market, so to speak, and we're not the first civilization to go through this. Caesar Augustus, back in, the days when, they were doing the census and Jesus was born, tried to institute a bachelor tax because he said we have too many young men out there who aren't getting married, because he saw there was an economic aspect of family life. Unfortunately, it didn't really succeed, so I'm not suggesting we take our economic policy from first century Palestine, but there is a change in how we think about marriage, and we're here at Cornerstone, which is great. We all love the Cornerstone, and there's a sociologist, Andrew Cherlin at Johns Hopkins, who said we've been shifting, our social model of marriage has been shifting from a Cornerstone model, where you get married, you graduate high school or sometimes college, you find someone, you build a life together, you have kids, you work together towards that end, you're building together. We've shifted from that model that was most common in the 50s, 60s, to the capstone model. Today we might call this the Taylor Swift model, You go through your early 20s, late 20s, early 30s, building your career. You go through your, formative years as a young adult, and then around, early 30s, mid 30s, you find that person as sort of the cherry on top. Your graduation from young singlehood to, well, now I'm ready to settle down. If you're a college-educated American, that model still works okay. In the late 70s, it was about 88% of women, I'm just using women for shorthand, it's roughly similar for men, 88% of women by age 40 were married if they had a college degree. Nowadays, that's about 84%. So people are still getting married. Their average age of marriage is much later, but college-educated people are still getting married. It's the non-college educated American, working class, blue-collar Americans who have a high school diploma or less, that is where marriage rates have plummeted. 96% of women in 1979 were married by age 40, 74% today. So that's a huge drop-off. It's because the economics and the cultural shift around what marriage is, they feel like they're never going to achieve that capstone, so why bother?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Everything you're saying, it's so important. It's almost, and this may sound counterintuitive, but it's almost become that there's such reverence for marriage that it's like, I can't do that until I've got everything else in my life together. In fact, it may be I'm even willing to have a kid outside of marriage if I don't feel ready. And this is a fundamental cultural shift, as you say, this shift from marriage being a cornerstone, meaning it's one of the important steps along the path of life to something that has to be left till the end. And one of the reasons I run schools is to help young people understand, well, what are those series of decisions that create the greatest likelihood for happiness, economic prosperity, having choices to lead the life of your own choosing? We need to recapture that. It used to be that there was a script, right? There was a middle class script, and we happen to teach something called the success sequence in our schools. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, that's just a fancy title for steps that a generation ago, that's just what people did, right? So finish at least a high school degree, then get a full-time job of any kind, so you learn the dignity and discipline of work. And then if you have children, if you get married first, that series of decisions, education, work, marriage, then children. From an economic perspective, 97% of millennials who follow that series of decisions avoid poverty. And the vast majority enter the middle class or beyond. We actually teach that content in our schools because many of our young people aren't hearing that script. In fact, there are often these larger narratives around climate change, or we live in an oppressive society, or capitalism is evil. And you almost have, there are polls on this. There are young people who say, I don't want to bring a child into the world under these conditions. It's such a pessimistic view, and I think we as the grown-ups, we have collective wisdom for what we know most likely leads to lives of human flourishing. So I'm optimistic, but there has to be an effort on the part of us as grown-ups to recapture that knowledge that used to be the social norm. Go ahead.
So at what point we are all aware that this society have convinced women to go against their instinct, the maternal instinct, and they can change this for a dog, for a cat, or simply you just can, maybe perhaps take a friend and pursue your own happiness. And when you tell with the feminist movement, when you tell the girls that your purpose is to be happy, is to follow your own instinct, is to follow your own path, while the reality on those is that our purpose is to serve. As a man, you should serve your woman, and as a woman, you should serve your family, and then continuation of serving your community. You need to get into a relationship for family but then to serve a strong nation. But what happened when Ian is pointing to the statistics? It's a path that you have to follow. First education, then the kids. But what education we're bringing right now to our children when only 30% are proficiency in math, in learning? I mean, they are graduating without being prepared. They don't know even how to file taxes. They don't know how to invest their money. They don't know how economics works. So then we're not preparing this society. They don't have the skills. They don't have anything. But now it's our duty to show what is the path. Because what it means is that poor people cannot have kids, or while looking back on all this generation, that they need to have education and everything. What it means that what happened with Abraham Lincoln, he has one mom, single mom, and they were poor. It means only if you pursue a purpose in life that is served others and that you have to prepare in your life, that doesn't mean that you have to go step by step in life or need money. You just have to listen. What is essential in life is to procreation, is to procreate. It says in Genesis, the Lord created man and woman to be fruitful and multiply. This is what it's all about. And you should listen to the basis of everything is the Bible, is in the Bible.
So I want to tee up a number of things you said, and we can all comment on it. And Professor Summers, I want to ask you to take us in this conversation on a very easy topic called gender. All right? Because at the core of these conversations about family, there's a lot of conversation about gender and what is it. You've spent decades working on this in this field, right? The War Against Boys, this profound book you wrote, and really speaking about feminism. But there is this conversation that the family, depending on who you ask, is either an oppressive institution because it squashes some kind of view of gender, or it's a place of great flourishing. So if you can talk with us about sort of the last several decades of this conversation in terms of gender and feminism and masculinity and femininity, because it is at the core of this issue of the critique against family in some ways. Maybe you can lead us here.
The past few decades, there's been an outpouring of writing, thinking on the family by many feminist scholars, and it's almost entirely negative. And I wrote a book called Who Stole Feminism? And in that book, I questioned a lot of the statistics they were using, because one of the things they would come with these horrific statistics that would make it seem like the average man was a predator, that the family was a dangerous environment, a center of trauma and unhappiness and frustration, and just an obstacle to self-realization. Now there's some truth that sometimes that is the case, but that is not the norm. And I looked at these theories of masculinity, and it's true, there is something, they say toxic masculinity that exists. There are men who exhibit a very dangerous forms of masculinity. They destroy things and prey on weaker people. But there's something that's much more common, which is ethical masculinity, is men who protect weaker people, who don't destroy, they build. And that's most of the men that I've known, and all of you have known, I'm sure, and yet the most negative was constantly set up as the norm. And the family was set up, as I said, as this institution that was the center of unhappiness and misery and so forth. It was just too extreme, but it became very hard to question it, because first of all, for a long time it was just kind of in the universities and they were writing for one another. But then it began, I watched this happen since the 1980s, it began to trickle down until it was sort of became the new conventional wisdom. And it's just a mistake, and I realized it was a mistake that's going to make people very unhappy. Men and women need each other. We're not on separate teams. We're not, feminists shouldn't be here. Like, let's root for our team against that. No, we're in this together. And most of us will make our life with a man. We'll have sons, we'll have daughters. This is something to celebrate and not denigrate. But there has been constant denigration, and there's a need for a correction. I really think people have been misinformed.
So, one of the beauties of the Christian worldview is the creation of Adam and Eve and the beauty of the union, right? And you see in the Old Testament, you see in the New Testament, this beautiful model. I remember when I went to my father-in-law to ask his permission to marry his daughter, my wife, and he said, "Thank you, sit down, I have a few questions to ask you." And the first thing he said to me, I never expected it, he said, "What does Ephesians chapter 4 mean to you?" This is a great passage of Paul in the New Testament, right? Of Ephesians and marriage, right? And I remember thinking, I have to answer this really well right now. But this profound question about male and female, and what does it mean to love and to honor, and all these incredible theological teachings that the Lord has put in his word for us. I say all that to say that a critique that I've sometimes seen, Dr. Summers, and for us to consider on various sides of the equation is that the Christian family or the traditional family, they say, we've seen all the dysfunctions in those families. Why would we ever want those families? We've seen the abuse of men in those families. We've seen the lack of flourishing in some of those families. So they will take those examples and say, there's something wrong with the ideal, because you can't live it out. That's a problem. That's what they would say. How do we deal with that, right? With that kind of critique. I remember reading a piece just a few years ago written in Current Affairs, why the family should be abolished, a socialist Marxist critique. Lengthy, and all of it was the traditional family, the Christian family has failed, and here's why. The children are doing this, the parents are doing this, the moms are doing this, the dads are doing this. We don't want those kind of families. We need a better family than that. So you look at the flaw and then you say the ideal is not real. How do we deal with that critique?
Well, we've been using the term family very broadly in this conversation. And I really think part of this is we have to have the courage to say that not all family types are the same. Certainly as relates to the development and moral development of children. So if we advocate for the ideal, because we're really talking about marriage, right? We're really talking about marriage. And like I speak often on this topic of, if I say that we're encouraging our students to follow the success sequence or seek out marriage in your life, that is the ideal. We have to figure out ways to do that without it seeming like we're demonizing other family types, right? In the neighborhood where we run our school, the non-marital birth rate is 84.5%, right? So nearly 9 in 10 babies are born outside of marriage. So the vast majority of our students have not seen the ideal. But we take that on as a school to say, well, then we have an even greater responsibility to share what the likelihood of success, happiness, all of these things are in different family types. And it takes great courage, because there is this almost you're shaming, you're shaming by holding up this ideal, because somehow that means you're saying bad things about single mothers, when oftentimes it's a single mom who's really trying to make things happen and keep it together. So I do feel that we collectively have to figure out ways to talk about this subject. Holding marriage, healthy marriage, by the way, and of course you have to make all of the caveats. We're not talking about abusive situations or anything like that, but healthy marriages where two parents first bond with each other, make a commitment to each other before they then make a joint commitment to a child. And we have to figure out ways to speak about that lovingly, and again, not demonizing, particularly generally women who are single moms. But in many of my conversations with many of the single mothers in our schools, they thank God we're talking to their children about this topic, and healthy family formation because they wish someone had done that when they were at a younger age.
Yeah, and so how do we do that? Now we're getting a little deeper. How do we do that in a society? I appreciate what you're saying in the different family types, but one of my colleagues just sent to me a post, and many of you may have seen it, that in Quebec, I believe it's in Quebec in Canada, the first throuple adoption took place last week. 3 gay men who lived together as a family adopted a 4-year-old little girl. And the Quebec approved it as a new family structure, right? So we live in a society, I imagine those things will happen here very soon, maybe in the works already. And how do we handle that, not demonizing, but having the courage to speak about that and the potential pitfalls and damages and moral damages to all that. Patrick?
Yeah, just a thought on that. I mean, first of all, 100% second everything Ian's saying on the need to speak about this with compassion and lead with love, but also recognize that all of us, fundamentally, no matter who you are, where you are in life, you have a mother and a father, right? They came together, whether that's through traditional marriage, in vitro fertilization, of adoption. There's plenty of ways that you got to this world, but regardless, you have that relationship. And the more we can do in our own lives, in our churches, in our policy, to recognize that bond between husband and man and woman, ideally husband and wife. They were the ones who produced this new person. We want to build those structures to support them in whatever, in the challenges that they're facing. And, that takes courage, right? It's hard to go out of the public square and say the ideal form of marriage is the one that recognizes that this unique relationship, not 3 men, not 2 women, not 5 people combining their DNA in some lab somewhere, but a man and a woman joining together is the way that children are conceived and brought into the world. In 99% of the cases, we need to be orienting our policies around that and celebrating that in a way, not demonizing, but recognizing the value there. Because I think what we've done is we've turned marriage from this sort of social default into one path among many. And it's sort of like when you go into the supermarket and, my wife says, get some, jam on the way home. And I see strawberry and raspberry and peach and preserves and, all the seedless, all the different kinds of, and I kind of freeze up, right? The paradox of choice, some sociologists call this. When marriage is no longer presumed as the path that we sort of culturally expect that most people are not, and not everyone through human history has gotten married, obviously. There's ways you live your life without marriage just fine, but for most people, that is the most reliable path to happiness and fulfillment. And when we are so non-judgmental and so unwilling to make the values claim that marriage is actually more beneficial to the adults who participate in it, to the kids who have much lower rates of child abuse and these other things compared to when you have multiple partners in the home, and then to society as a whole, because married people devote themselves to their community, they're involved in their church, they're they're often conduits of volunteerism and all these sort of things. When we're not willing to make that value claim, then it becomes one option among many at the supermarket, and there's no reason why you would favor one over the other, whether that's in public policy or anywhere else.
Carolina?
It's very interesting because I want to read this part of the Bible with Genesis 2:24 says, God's blueprint. Actually, it says, a man shall leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they can become one flesh. And why I'm reading this is because we as moms have that power of telling our boys that they have the responsibility not to follow this world, but to follow their purpose in life, which is exactly what it says in the Bible. You should be responsible to prepare yourself to hold a family, make happy one woman instead of so many women. But it's very difficult in that world where they are actually glamorizing Bad Bunny at the NFL when it's actually, I don't know if you ever understand their words. I speak Spanish and I can tell you this gibberish is denigrating the woman at the lowest level, and it's porn. When you listen to this music, it's porn to your ears. It's actually horrible, disgusting. And what they do, the NFL, is putting that in the spot. This is for children. They are going to grow up looking for that instead of so many artists that are really representative for the American culture. And this is why you should just block all this culture that is not safe for you, that is not really helping you to grow in your purpose in life and to start choosing. Charlie Kirk is actually showing us what to do. And it's very simple. It's listen to good music, listen to classic music, listen to gospel music, worship music, and honor your mom, your dad, and be ready to date with a purpose. What is this old culture about sexual activity as a recreational instead of with a purpose? That's why women lost all their dignity, and men, they lost all the compassion. Instead of looking for a future, they're looking for a body. And then as a mom, it's your duty to center your child, to center the man who is going to guide, provide, and protect for that future family.
Carolina and panelists, I want to ask you about what I call the free, open sex culture that we live in. And you've touched on it with Bad Bunny in the NFL. So let's talk a little bit about that, because there's a connection of sex, family, in the conversation of the future of the family when you divorce sexuality and procreation and sexual pleasure from the confines of the biblical Christian family. And it's happening, and it's been happening for a long, long time. Free sex. Some of the arguments on the left are significant about women should be free to have sex with whoever they want. Doesn't really matter. You have OnlyFans now that has glamorized porn for everybody. And it's become a virtue almost now. That is a significant attack on the family, on the sacredness of sex, on covenant marriage, right? In these beautiful relationships. Can we talk a little about marriage and the covenant of sexuality in marriage and the attacks of the culture, and even that have infiltrated the church, evangelical churches, where the majority of young people, by the time they come to the altar, have had multiple sex partners already. So these things undermine and hurt the family. So can we share your thoughts on that? How do we deal with that cultural issue that's front and center, either on TV with the NFL, Netflix, on your phone, everywhere?
So I just want to say we need to understand that marriage's unique role cannot be replicated in anything else. Some of you have heard the word love is love. It doesn't mean that a strong relationship between two men or a friendship or with any relationship, close relationship that is helping you, that you are thriving on it or that you felt love, it means that is a family. We cannot give that unique definition, divine definition, to something else that is not with a purpose of procreation.
And I'll just add one thing, that if you think about how to live your life and how to organize it, it is tempting to give in to the lure of pleasure and sensation, and the philosophers knew all about that. But recognize that human beings, unlike other animals, have a deeper need. We're not satisfied with sensation. We need meaning. Now, how do you have a life of meaning? And this is where we get back to family. One thing, when you have a child, your first child, the first thing that's very surprising is you're almost a different person, because now you have someone you love more than yourself, or you sacrifice yourself, and that's very unusual. The depth of that love that parents talk about, and it's annoying sometimes to other people, but you're feeling it, and I see this so often. In the first parent said, "I'm so worried that people will miss this experience of and what it adds, and family relationships. And I hear now that people are cutting off their relationships because of politics. And I'm not going to speak to my mother, and I'm cutting off my and when you cut someone off like that, you're first of all, what are you doing to that parent, or what are you doing to that grandmother that you're not going to see? You're not just making her unhappy, you undermine the meaning of their lives, because that's how we do it. That's the fabric of human life. It's not going to satisfy this need that we have for connection.
I think you're obviously right. I'm not going to argue with Aristotle by any means. There is a sense, though, that I'm very concerned that it won't satisfy, but there are some simulacra that are increasingly available that can kind of paper over that part of your soul until you push it down far enough and you don't think about it anymore. And I'm thinking about the question you started earlier, that you started us off with. I mean, you think about rampant pornography sort of filling that hole of healthy sexuality, distorting it and taking the cheap route to get to that satisfaction. Things like video games. When taking I played plenty of Madden back in my day, but we definitely know people who spend too much time on video games and let that warp their sense of camaraderie and adventure and going out and doing something. Well, now I'm just doing this in the digital Call of Duty world instead. People, marijuana legalization, some of these things that aren't conducive to a life well lived. You're not showing up for work on time. You're not the type of person anybody would want to marry because you're not capable of engaging in a relationship that way. These are decisions that we make, in terms of what messages that we're sending, what cultural values we're promoting, what we decide to legalize, what we don't. We could take steps to change how hard it is to access online pornography. We could restrict or put more guardrails around how easy it is to buy marijuana or other drugs. We could be creative about some of these cultural messages that are being sent through video games and all the rest, but it takes courage to have those conversations, and it has to recognize that we're shaped by what's available out there, and that it's not just like, oh, well, that's the free market, that's the end of the story. No, we have to recognize that it's not just like, if you're a consenting adult, that's the end of the story. They actually shape our desires. They shape the kind of people we'll become. And I think until we're able to do that, we're going to continue to see marriage rates, tumble down.
I mean, one thing, as we ask this question, how do we deal with popular culture that seems to elevate all these behaviors that are harmful, particularly to young people? 3 weeks ago, we all witnessed a horrific assassination of Charlie Kirk, and the response from the nation has just been incredible. The outpouring of kind of folks who had been following him and those who were discovering the conversations he was having on college campuses. And there's a lot of discussion about his ability to go into situations, to engage in debate, and that's valued. But something I've really observed was how much, if you watch many of his discussions, how much he focused on messaging to young people: get married, have children. That's the pathway to happiness. It's actually quite extraordinary, because I think that's one of the central reasons he resonated so much with young people. He was just honest. He had the courage to tell young people, because running schools, there is an inherent desire for young people to learn the path of happiness. And I think we've just become so fearful because we've kind of leveled all family types the same. We can't elevate marriage, but he had the courage to do that. He created a permission structure for young people to say, you know what, I am thinking about marriage. Like, that's important to me. So these are all complex things we can try to solve through policy. Let's have age laws so that a kid can't access pornography online, and those will have some marginal impact, but that won't stem the tide. We have to create this stirring in the hearts of young people through faith and through some of these other messages. So I think the Charlie Kirk example of what he was able to bring, and this making it really plain to young people: you want to be happy, think about marriage and family. And for many of the young people in the room, I'd really love to, this isn't a Q&A, but I'd really love to hear your own impressions of, does that, and especially I would imagine here at Cornerstone, but does that message resonate? Because for a lot of students that are in our schools, they are very thankful that we're giving counter-cultural messages. In fact, if you ever, not to linger on Charlie Kirk so long, but there are many videos of him actually talking to young women who are on OnlyFans and engaging in pornography. And they're trying to show how independent they are and how this is my choice. And he breaks it down. He says, I really pray for you. I see that you're trying to manufacture something in your head that is not right. And I pray for you that there is another path for you. And you can see in those conversations, there is something there. So having the courage to talk about these things in a loving, faith-based way, I think is the path forward.
I want to close with a thought, and I want to engage with the people. And I see so many students, and I want to know how many students, raise your hand, if you think having children is related to having money. More you have money, you have kids. How many of you think you're waiting to having the right amount of money? I don't know how much, but how many of you? Well, one courageous man
There's a few there. There's a few there as well.
Two. Okay, and now, how many of you trust the Lord? This is impressive.
How many
because
do what?
You should trust the Lord because He provides. As soon as you follow the paths of the Lord, which is multiply, be fruitful, I think you should trust the Lord on that moment and say He will provide for you because you are doing a great job. And let me tell you something. The first time that I had a child, I was just a student. I was living la vida loca.
Colombians are known to do that sometimes.
Not promoting that, but to be honest, the Lord sent me a blessing. It was my child, my first child. I was so panicked about it. And I say, I'm done. I'm not going to finish my career. I'm not going to finish this. I'm not going to do this. All my thoughts, what about negativity? And then something inside me told me, it's okay. Everything is going to be all right. Just trust the Lord. And I did it. And absolutely, I think He took care not only of me, but of this child. And you cannot imagine how my life is now right in the right path. And I think so many of you and so many of this young generation, they need a child in their lives.
Well, thank you. One of the things I want us to speak about is how do we provide the kind of support for future parents and current parents to be great parents. You wrote a book, Christina, on virtue and vice, and I was so impressed, Ian, when I went to visit your academy in the Bronx and the amazing work you and your team are doing in the Vertex Partnership Academies. And some of the most profound conversations I've had with students came with the questions from your students, the profound questions they were asking me about life and career and so on. And one of my dear friends, Jim Sprague, is here. Jim, I know you're in the audience and overseeing one of the largest pregnancy resource centers, and the work he does to how do you train fathers and prepare fathers, to be great fathers? How do you do that? So I want to speak about moral formation, character formation for families, for future parents. How do we do that? How should we do that? What are the kinds of institutions that could help? I think of our churches. I was thinking about, we have 6 children, and it was fascinating to me that when our children were born in the hospital and the baby was there, and every single time, one of the key individuals that always showed up was Child Protective Services in the hospital.
Wow. And
they wanted to visit our home to see what kind of home arrangements we had. The pastor didn't show up.
Oh my God.
The church didn't show up, but CPS showed up, right? And I've always thought about that. It's very interesting that a government office was there, but the church wasn't there necessarily, or the pastor wasn't there. I'm not saying it's the same for everyone, but in our situation it was. But it made me think about, okay, I understand what they're trying to do. Are you ready for this? Is your home ready for this? Are you ready for that? I get that. I get that. I think there were some appropriate, insights or impulses for that. But I'm thinking about today as we encourage young men and women and many to get married, have children. There's a beautiful thing. There's a God-ordained design. There's an ideal. How do we help them to do that well? Yeah. Because that's a significant challenge. Someone said recently, parenting is the loneliest thing you'll ever do. So how do we help future parents, current parents? What do you recommend? And Ian, I want to ask you to kick that off because you're working with young men and women and you're providing that model. Yeah. So talk about that moral formation, and then we'll go from there.
Well, there are two elements of this. One, and I'll talk about how do we cultivate virtue, and then how do you give practical information to young people. On the virtue side, so the first decision when we formed this is a international baccalaureate public charter high school in the Bronx, one of the very first decisions we made was that, we're going to have strong academics, apprenticeships, all these wonderful opportunities around academic rigor. But the most important thing is what are we doing deliberately around moral formation? Because if you're running schools, if you have kids in your care for 8 to 10 to 12 hours per day, you are in the moral formation business, whether you like it or not, whether you're intentional or not. Yeah. And in fact, even if you're unintentional or you think that you're not shaping the character of your students, your absence of action is leaving a void that will be filled by forces that are likely hostile to what it is that you're trying to do. So the first decision, we said we're going to organize our school around the 4 cardinal virtues of courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. And they're called the cardinal virtues from the Latin root cardo, which means hinge, right? So all other standards of moral excellence emanate from these 4 cardinal virtues. So optimism, gratitude, grace, persistence, determination, all of those emanate from these 4 virtues. And so every morning our students recite I statements. So courage is I reject victimhood and boldly persevere even in times of uncertainty and struggle. Or justice, I uphold our common humanity and honor the inherent dignity of each individual. So you're not special because you're black or you're a girl. You're special because you're a human being. And that's the foundation that we have to operate from. So from a virtues perspective, that's the approach that we take. And on the very practical level around family formation, I'll share a very quick story, which is that we teach what I called earlier the success sequence in our schools. Education, work, marriage, children, 97% avoidance of poverty. There were a lot of people who opposed us teaching that. You can't teach this content because you're shaming single moms. Nearly 90% of your kids are being raised in single-parent households. How can you possibly teach that? And so it was a real thing. We were under enormous pressure to stop teaching this content. And so I was in New Orleans. We were doing some research on really good high schools. So here I find myself in New Orleans in a 9th grade class in a low-income community made up of black, Hispanic, and Asian kids. And I asked the teacher if I could engage the students. And I said to the students, if you knew that there were a series of decisions in your control, that when young people just like you follow that series of decisions, 97% avoid poverty, would you want to know what those decisions are? And they looked at me and they said, well, of course. Why? Of course. Yeah, please tell us. We want to know. And I said, well, there's some grown-ups who think that I shouldn't tell you because somehow I'm going to embarrass you or I'm going to shame you. So you know what? Better I not tell you at all. And they looked at me like I was crazy. Who are you? You can't tease this information. You can't, let that and then hold it back. You tell us and let us decide if that information will be powerful for how the decisions that we make in our own lives. And it was a real revelation for me because it was a real gatekeeper moment for me to see the people who were saying, you can't teach this. First of all, many of them have followed the success sequence in their own lives, but somehow think, oh, you're moralized, you can't tell this. And so anyway, we proceeded to have this great conversation with this room of 14-year-olds about these decisions, not in a prescriptive manner, but in a descriptive, meaning if you make this series of decisions, data says this is the likelihood of economic success. Decisions in this order yield different likely outcomes. And at the end of it, I felt the students felt that they had been treated as respected decision makers in their own lives. And so I think there is an aspect for how we speak about these issues to young people, not in a scolding or you must do this, but in an empowering way where you're a decision maker. And so if we're able to match virtue and moral formation with good information around practical steps that young people need to make to form healthy families, that's the approach that we are taking.
Patrick?
I want to answer the question you asked, how do we form these young adults, maybe attack it from the reverse angle. The current US fertility rate is something like 1.6 kids per woman. That's the lowest it's been in our history. It's following the trend of other Western nations and Eastern ones too. Since 2007, the birth rate among married women has only dropped by about 3 or 4 percentage points. It's roughly where it was in the early 80s. Among unmarried women, the birth rate has dropped almost 30%. So the biggest driver of America's fertility crisis is not that people who are married aren't having more, they're having their 2.1 kids, the white picket fence, all that, and stopping. That hasn't changed much since the 80s. What's changed since the Great Recession is that now young women, unmarried women, they aren't getting married and they're not having kids. So on the one hand, it's a success story in the sense that it's not, if you ask me, should we raise the U.S. birth rate by having a bunch of unmarried moms having babies? I would say no, that's not how I want to see it. But I would hope, and I think we could all hope, that marriage would become more appealing in a way that, because people see, if I get married, I might have a kid, I got to make sure that I'm going to find someone who's worth marrying, right? And so I think it's really essential, especially in churches, because churches can speak to this in a moral language that schools, even the best schools struggle to sometimes, or universities or other, sort of places where you're formed as an individual. Churches are able to build the village of today, right? Hillary Clinton used to say it takes a village to raise a child, and she kind of got made fun of for it, which is fair. But she was right in the sense that American parenting styles, where you're living in a suburb somewhere and you're not in your extended family all the time, or you're maybe not plugged into a local community, that can feel very isolating, as we were talking about. If the church is not intentional about walking with that couple when they're preparing for marriage, when they find out they're pregnant, when they have the baby and you're bringing the lasagna meals over, okay, now let's invite you to our ministry for new parents. Let's make sure you have childcare. Let's make sure that when we have fees for things, we're charging by the family instead of by the person, because that makes it a lot more affordable. Those type of little tweaks that we can, and a lot of churches already do this, but just being intentional about it and making sure that we're not forgetting about the invitation to young people and helping find opportunities where they can match and meet and date and all the rest. I think that has to be part of that conversation, because then once that's a possibility, then I think people might be more open to these conversations around moral formation rather than fear or hesitation or a sense that that's just not something I'm ever going to be in the position to be able to do.
Christina?
Yes, and I'll just add to that. If you look at some of the data, like on the loneliness epidemic, especially among young men, and also if you ask young people, how do you see your life? Most still do see themselves getting married and having children. It's still an aspiration somewhere. but it's increasingly hard to achieve. And not only is there a lot of negativity around it, but it's still alive in young people. But they don't know how to do it. They don't know when to do it. We're not really honest with them about how easy it is to have a baby when you're 20, and it gets harder in your 30s, later 30s. There is the reality of the decline in fertility in a woman, and men too. So we have to be honest about that. But then there's another problem, which is, if you ask people, why did you get married or why aren't you married, they haven't met anybody. And we have to confront the problem of the male gap, as it will, is that young men who are failing to flourish and failing to thrive. There is something wrong right now in our society, in our schools, possibly in our families, with the way we are treating boys. There's a college gap, there's an achievement gap at every level. Today, young women have moved ahead of young men, and this is across all social classes and ethnicities. The young women are far more likely to go to college. They're going into careers at very high level, and with young men, I think the economist Larry Summers said that if things continue, that in 20 years or so, something like 30% of working age young men are just going to be out of the workforce. There's just a huge swath of young men who aren't looking for work, aren't working, they're just sort of getting by, and they're lost. So there's a gap in education between men and women. Typically people marry assortatively, they find someone with the same level, but young women cannot find, they're not there. And this seems to be a problem we could fix, because we know how to educate. We have a lot of information about how to get boys interested in education, but our schools aren't doing it. There's been an increased, for lack of a better word, a kind of feminization of the classroom. As one of my colleagues said, it's increasingly schools are run by women for girls, and the boys are there sort of on sufferance. And if you look at the sort of assignments and the way the behavior expectations and so forth, it's changed a lot over the decades, and increasingly catering to young women. So it's a problem we could address, and I sort of appeal to my feminist friends who I say, if you want what's good for women, you're going to have to do something for young men and boys, because right now there is this gap, and it's just one area where I think there's some practical solutions.
Can we, as we speak about the moral formation piece, a lot of data, thank you, but I want us to talk about the beauty of marriage and the beauty of family life. And when my father-in-law many years ago sat me down and said, tell me what Ephesians 4 chapter means, I was 19 years old at the time. 54 now, many years, 34 years later, I have a different understanding of Ephesians 4 than I did as a 19-year-old. And you realize that beautiful passage of the New Testament, the profound beauty of marriage. And one of the most amazing things in the scripture is that the marriage in Ephesians 4, it mirrors how Christ loves the church, we're told. That's a profound teaching. Incredible, beautiful implications. Self-sacrifice, right? Sacrificial love. Service, you mentioned. Humility, all these beautiful, wonderful virtues, and that you're, as a human being, are able to model and to practice and to refine throughout marriage. I remember when we first got married, my wife and I would always talk about getting old and growing old together. And you go see parks and you see elderly men and women who've been married and are holding hands. And you see the beauty of what that is. And you appreciate it more. So can we talk about the beauty of it? Because the data supports it, right? But there's something beautiful about it that our culture, that we're losing in the culture. And I think, and there's nothing like beauty. Beauty is more powerful than any argument, any data point we can put out there. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the beauty of marriage, the beauty of parenting, the beauty of family life. Not to say that it's not difficult. You mentioned this morning, little kids, little challenges, big kids, big challenges. My grandmother would say the same thing, literally, what you said. She would say, when they're little, it's easy. When they're big, oh boy, your
Maybe
kids.
it's from Colombia?
Maybe it's from Colombia, I don't know, but she would say that to us. And I remember her saying that. But not to whitewash and say it's not difficult. It's complicated, it's difficult, it's challenging, but there's a profound beauty to it as well. So maybe we can comment on that, please.
But it's also complicated to be single. It's also complicated to be a widow. It's also complicated, so choose your complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, at what point, what is the correct answer? It's at least you're following the path of God if you're choosing the family, because it's the only thing that is going to, the only model that is going to ensure the humanity, the continuation of humanity. And at one moment, you as a mom have in your hands the power of shaping society just by teaching the basic for your boy, first of all, different from your girl. But mom, you need to understand that your boy understands that he is here to provide, protect, and guide your future woman, your future family. And then as a woman, you guys need to do that good job like this. The woman is going to trust, follow, and submit. Because you're not going to submit to the rules of one place if you are not agree with those rules, or you are not seeing that they are doing great. So a woman will always follow a man who is correct in their path and clear that he knows how to provide, protect, and guide that woman and ensure a safe environment to their kids, to that woman to fulfill her role of guiding those kids, educating those kids, well-nourish those kids, and ensure that morality is taught to those kids in the same way. Because if you put those kids actually in the word of the Lord, you are basically giving the most essential thing. It's you're choosing the wisdom way for them to live in life. It's biblical model, and it's time you have to give to your kids. Time is the more valuable thing you can give to them. Time, it's something that you're gonna need to provide, not money, not toys. How many of you remember that favorite toy or that favorite moment with your mom and dad? So this is what it's actually all about, that society resumed that as just money or just accomplished with a contract. This is not only a contract. Marriage is the perfect design for humanity. It's the only way to fulfill your life and to fulfill your purpose.
Thank you, Carolina.
Yeah, I think about some of the statistics Christina shared about loneliness, particularly amongst young men. You know, a lot of that is a function of not feeling needed, of feeling adrift, like not having a purpose for your life. And many of the wonders, the beauty of marriage is that you have a union for which you both are needed, and you have purpose, and you're willing to make those sacrifices. You're willing to provide for your family, and you're willing to, it's interesting you used the word there, submit. For a lot of young women, certainly because I've had this conversation with many of our female students, submission. Oh my God, they see subservience, they see dependency.
Slavery.
Exactly.
Literally.
No, but this is a cultural shift. No, it's not. That's not what that means at all. But there is a cultural narrative that you are now somehow volunteering to be less than in this relationship. And you know, we're actually considering doing some things where we bring married parents from our community to talk to our students, just to talk about their lives, just talk about the challenges, but also talk about the beauty of having children and grandchildren and the sacrifices that they made for each other. And it's not always along, clear gender roles. But I think there is this interpretation, particularly amongst young women, that, well, I can't be with that guy, where he's not yet where, he needs to be. There's this kind of, so I can't submit to him.
Yeah, trust your instinct, girls.
Yeah.
If that doesn't add, just let him allow to grow up in his masculinity, and then maybe soon, hopefully, they're going to be ready to date with a purpose.
Right. That's the cornerstone view of marriage, that you are growing and developing together to get to the ultimate goal, and there's maybe not as much patience to allow that sort of flourishing development to happen together.
I'm looking at it and I see Everlasting Father as one of the titles that are carved in the beautiful sanctuary over here. And it's reminding me of a conversation I had with a pastor friend of mine who said that one of the, things that he had to remember when he started preaching and after he left seminary was when he speaks about father and paternity and the love of an all benevolent dad, it took him a while to recognize that not everybody in the congregation had that same experience, that a lot of the people that he was ministering to had no frame of reference. They knew an abusive dad, or they didn't know their dad at all, or they had maybe, their mom had a couple different men in the household at different times, but they had no relationship. And that was true for both the boys and the girls too, and especially for young women. Picking up on what Ian said, I think it's important to point out that marriage does not equal Leave It to Beaver, right? That the marriage today, dads do a lot more work around the house than they did in the 1950s. The average dad in 1970 something or other, in the 70s, we'll say, had never changed a diaper. And now, as that's pretty common, there's a lot more egalitarianism around the house, right? It still works out that most, when you have a couple and one of them wants to stay home, it tends to be more mom than dad, but there are still plenty of stay-at-home dads too. I was one for a while. There's a greater recognition that, I don't want to say it, that's maybe too strong of a condemnation of the past. It was a different partnership with the past. But today, when more women are having success in college than men, they're trying to balance having a job, having a career, and having a family in the same way that men have always done. There's a recognition that there needs to be some give in the joints. So if that means, you're ending work at 3:00 and you're not, gunning for that corner office or that big promotion in the same way that you were before you were having kids, before you got married, maybe that's a sacrifice that you're called to give up. Maybe there's, those conversations that you can have with a mentor couple or with a pastor that you can figure out the right way to balance that within your marriage. There's no one right model, but being explicit about that and telling, again, young men, that there's all these different ways that you can give of yourself, you can sacrifice of yourself to serve, and also for young women that it's not a death sentence, that you're not barefoot in the kitchen, baking cookies all day, that there's creative opportunities for you to be a mom and to give back through service or through work or whatever it happens to be, that it's going to be a new creative blend that's not going to be 9 to 5, 40 hours a week maybe, or whatever it happens to be. Those conversations need to be explicit and to take place to maybe for people who haven't had a positive relationship with marriage to kind of help them dip their toe in the water a little bit.
You both have touched on this issue in various ways. I want to bring it for our audience to consider the kinds of structural changes that should happen in society to help parents and families, right? What should those be? As we think about elections that are forthcoming, decisions in our local municipalities, how we structure our own lives, there are these structures of work, how work is done in our country, that it sometimes could be prohibitive to having good families and good parenting. There are economic policies and tax policies that perhaps are undermining family, right? School policies that are undermining parental rights. The views of policy and gender perhaps, and family. So what are the kinds of things you recommend we think deeply about and suggest that there are changes that need to be made wage increases, the whole issue of economics and wages in the family, parental leave, right? All these things, these have very real implications for family life, the ability to be good parents and the ability to support children. How do we work through that in a society that is moving very fast? And sometimes that's the last thing on the mind of the market.
Yeah, I mean, the first and most important thing that specifically the government can do to help families is get out of the way. There's so many marriage penalties in our tax programs and in our safety net programs that if you're a low-income, especially a single mom, if maybe you're dating someone, you're cohabiting, oh, gee, this guy's really great, maybe we want to start a life together, but I'm making, poverty wages, just above poverty wages, he's pulling in a little bit more. When we combine our income together, now we're not eligible for the Medicaid benefits that I was receiving, or SNAP, or Section 8, the EIT, Earned Income Tax Credit if you're a low-wage worker. There's all these benefits that the way we've sort of unintentionally let them be structured over time, we're explicitly penalizing people for tying the knot. And we're rewarding them for staying cohabiting or staying in a more fluid relationship, which we know is worse for them and worse for kids. So that would be just number one. And there's people in DC who talk about this, and then you say, well, where's the money to fix this? And they scurry off. I'm not very popular at those cocktail parties, but it just requires a political courage to tackle this and to name it as a problem, because there's no reason why the federal or the state government should be putting their thumb on the scale away from marriage. At least try to make it neutral. And I would argue there's some areas where we could imagine making some benefits more generous for married parents, because especially those with young kids, because they're the ones who are bearing the burden of raising the next generation. And as birth rates continue to decline and as parenthood becomes more concentrated, those costs become heavier on young parents today in a way that when everybody was having kids and Social Security was well funded and all the rest, we didn't have to worry about this so much. But now we've socialized the cost of old age, and we've asked parents, again, particularly for kids like 0 to 5, they're the ones who are shouldering that burden, and we're going to benefit later in the form of future job creators and taxpayers and whatever else those kids grow up to be. So those parents have a justice claim on more support, when those kids are young. But that's once the kids are born. I think the more intriguing question is, are there dials we can turn that might make it more likely for people to get married? And I think one sneaky one that people don't think about very often is the cost of housing. If you're a young man and you're thinking about, proposing and that sort of thing, you feel like you want to have your feet on the ground. You want to have a place to call home when you bring home your new bride. If housing is too expensive and a down payment feels out of reach, you're going to keep delaying until you have your feet under you. That's totally natural. It's a human emotion. Same with having kids. People feel much more reluctant to have kids if they feel like they don't have the space for it than if they can have a place to call their own. So this sort of growing movement across the nation, a lot of people say, well, build more housing. It's true, we should build more housing to help people afford life in general, but more specifically, because parents and couples tend to be younger, they're earlier in their life, so they haven't had a chance to build up as much equity as people in their 30s and 40s. If we want to make it affordable for young people in their 20s to have kids, we need to kind of reduce their cost of living specifically, and that starts with housing.
Yeah, and I would say from a policy perspective, when I said earlier the success sequence, right? So education, work, marriage, and children, finish a high school degree, get a full-time job. Sounds simple, but depending on where you are in the country, those things are not so simple. So for example, in the neighborhood where we have our school, only 7% of kids graduate from high school ready for college in the Soundview section of the Bronx, meaning that 93% of ninth graders start, 4 years later they've either dropped out or they did earn their high school diploma but still cannot do math nor reading without remediation. And these are schools that if you live in that neighborhood, you're zoned for, because there's and you don't have a choice, and there's a cap on charter schools. So even if you had a great idea to open a new school to help these kids, you couldn't do it. So, and I think you were saying earlier, if only 30% of kids are reading at grade level, well, we need to address that, right? We need to have more school choice policies so that more young people can even get on the first rung of success. And I would encourage everyone in this room there was a federal tax credit passed in the bill that was signed on July 4th that allows individuals to make donations to what are called scholarship granting organizations. And this tax credit could bring in millions and millions and millions of dollars to kids in Michigan, to families who can then take those scholarships and spend it on private schools or SAT prep, college visits. But it requires the governor to say, yes, I'm going to opt the state in. And so far, I don't think Governor Whitmer has signaled that she's going to opt in, which is unbelievable. Almost every Republican governor has said yes. Most Democratic governors are saying that they're not going to opt in. So I would encourage you that this federal tax credit could be a huge opportunity to create school choice, particularly for low-income families. And then second, the second part of the success sequence, so it's education, work. Well, how about more apprenticeships in high school where during your junior and senior year, you can do apprenticeships, internships with the goal of actually earning an industry credential with labor market value, meaning you can get a job right out of high school. Because it shouldn't be that college is viewed as the only immediate option coming out of high school. Cornerstone has just developed this incredible new platform called SOAR, where you can engage fully online to get an accredited undergraduate degree or master's degree. Well, imagine we're now living in a world where more students coming out of high school can be working while not having to give up the idea of getting a degree. So I just think we have to think differently about how to remove the barriers that make it difficult for someone to get on that success sequence path.
Talk to us about the parental right and school piece, because that's a very serious issue here when you think about structural changes and what's happening in society, the importance of parents in education and moral formation.
Absolutely. Getting involved right now, parents, with some political issues is essential to preserve education and to restore education. At one point when I was young, I hated politics. And I arrived to this country not knowing anything about politics, but I felt immediately that politics were missing with my life. So at one point, policy, when it's messing with your life, you have to stop or shape policy. And this is why I joined Moms for Liberty. We were the only organization suing the Biden administration stopping about Title IX, stopping men going into women's sports. And we are passing legislation, 52 legislation so far protecting parental rights, fundamental parental rights to choose the upbringing of your children in education, in health, in morality, everything. I think it's a fundamental right for every parent to choose anything about your child, not a politician, not obviously a government. And then we passed legislation protecting the transition for minors. We do not believe that a child cannot vote and take that decision of voting, cannot take a permanent decision to change their body or to mutilate themselves. It's happening in all the states, including, unfortunately, in my free state of Florida. And but absolutely, we need to get involved and start join an organization. If you think your passion is education, my passion is education and restoring education for the future of our country, which is our children. Because at one point you can fix immigration, you can fix economy, you can fix so many issues in this country. But if you don't fix the education of our children, we're done. I mean, we are going to failure immediately because they're going to be our next voters, next legislators, next doctors. I mean, right now, Gerson, if you're going to a doctor, will you trust in a few years when you're getting a little more grown up. Will you trust right now a doctor who graduated just by ChatGPT magic? I mean, this is our future. So we need actually to take action on what is going on with our society right now, with our children. They hijacked the innocence of our children. They're hijacking the education of our children. They are taking in hand and shaping that future of our children. So to stop this is to go and vote for local elections. Local election is the school board members. Take the time, because it's a nonpartisan race, but do you know that they are taking all the decisions over the schools, including private schools? And if you are the ones who are thinking, it's okay, my child is in a Christian academy, and let me tell you, if they're receiving federal funds, it means they are receiving this DEI thing and in everything. I mean, this is all over. They have to abide by those, and at certain point, it's everywhere. You cannot just assume because they are on a private Christian academy or Catholic school that they are safe of what is happening, because we see they're infiltrated our educational system all over, and our kids are under attack. We need to save our kids, we need to save our young people, and we need to follow organizations like Moms for Liberty, like Turning Point, like so many organizations that are focused exactly on education. This is the future of our country.
Yeah, we need more Vertex Academies throughout the country.
Yep.
Well, imagine you are a 21-year-old mom in the South Bronx. You have a 5-year-old child that, through circumstances, you were a teen mom, and your life, you struggled. But the one thing that you want is that you want a better life for your child, right? Just put yourself in that person's shoes. And imagine saying to that mom, sorry, you have no choice but to send your 5-year-old to the school that only 7% of kids are graduating from college. That's not America. Like, school choice is so fundamental to almost everything that we're talking about. I mean, obviously we're talking about family, but to your point, if we're not developing young people the ability to read, the ability to reason, they're not marriageable, they're not taking responsibility, they don't have confidence, they're not building relationships. So there's some foundational elements to the formation of strong families, and school choice is a fundamental part of that.
We're talking about involvement, and Christina, when I read your history, professional history, one of the most amazing things is how involved you have been. And openly, in your bio, in your website, AEI, maybe the audience does not know that you used to be a Marxist.
Well, in high
a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
But certain events happened in your life, and you changed in your heart, and you were very involved then, but then you also have become very involved since then to address these issues that you're seeing of the what I will call the destructive sides of feminism.
Yes.
Right? So talk with us a little bit as we think about involvement, the kind of things we need to be doing when you think about education, vice and virtue. And you've heard Ian speak about education, parental rights, and all these things. What do you recommend as we think about the future, men and women? You've had a lot to say about the crisis with our boys and how they're being seen. Men, it's also happening with women.
Yeah, well, the first thing to understand and accept, it shouldn't be controversial, but sometimes I get hissed when I say this, men and women are different. All right? And if you have a little girl, you have a little boy, there are exceptions. I'm talking about the rule. As a rule, little boys are much more obstreperous. Their style of play involves a lot of sound effects, boom, bam, Teachers don't like it, mothers. I was a mother, I didn't like it, but boys can't exist just in this milieu of disapproval. And there is so much of that in society. And then you've got, this whole rhetoric around toxicity and media, these depictions of losers and deadbeats, and then women that are always saving the day, and it's this constant barrage, and it's having effects. And then we went in, women wanted to break up all the places where men were just with one another, all male. So there's no more. They've broken up most of the scouts, and they're changing the name, and it's not Boy Scouts, it's Young Scouts and so forth. And things that where men would go, they used to have clubs and things, all those were closed down. And now we're lamenting this epidemic of loneliness. These were places where, boys could get together and forge friendships, and we broke them apart. And there's a punishing kind of, and I worry because most psychologists now are female. So for here's a way men and women are different. There was one study at University of Pennsylvania, and they took several thousand adolescents and asked them, how do you feel when you're depressed or upset, and you talk over your problems with someone else? Do you feel better? And high percentage of the girls felt a lot better. They liked talking about their problems, and they felt better. And they asked the boys. First of all, they didn't even understand the question, and then they just said it was weird. That was like the number one answer, weird. And this psychologist, Amanda Rosie, she was at the University of Pennsylvania, I think she's somewhere now, but she said, maybe it is different. Maybe that's not how men deal with their problems. There's some other approach. And psychologists know that we should have a specialty, which is male psychology. And how apparently, if you want to help a young man or depressed, you have to present it like as a problem. We're going to solve this problem, not as like, let's talk about it. They don't want to do it. And so many women, I worry even about marriages where they go in and think, I've married my best friend and we can talk and talk and talk, and he may be like those boys, like, what do I do? So there's a difference there, and if you want to, and young men do have problems, we have to have a way to reach them, but it can't just be what works for women. And we had a huge feminist movement that helped us find ways in which the society wasn't well adapted to the needs of women, but we've overcorrected. And this, I think, a lot of the problems with marriage and that I see breaking down of marriages, men and women don't understand each other and can't, see themselves as, that there's a kind of mutuality, but rather than the sameness. I mean, there's a difference, and that's the source of beauty and attraction and humor and understanding, but it can be quite the opposite if there are these false expectations that you're marrying your best friend. The same sex, it's not like that if it's men and women. So I think that's very important, is to just accept that and understand that and integrate that into our institutions and our understanding of one another.
A lot of hard work to do. I want to give you each a moment to address the audience, and particularly our students as we close the evening, the many students who are here. I want to ask Christina if you can start just a last few words of counsel, exhortation to our students, young men and women here at Cornerstone, and the audience as well, about the future of family and the beauty of family and the things they should be thinking about. Please, Christina.
Well, I'm just thinking of an essay I read years ago by the late writer, he died, Tom Wolfe, called The Great Relearning. And Tom Wolfe was a journalist, and he'd gone to the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco, where he went to meet this group of hippies who were so radical that they had given up hygiene. And they just thought that was a bourgeois, oppressive hang-up. They weren't cutting their hair, they weren't cutting their nails, they weren't washing, and it turned out that this little sect of hippies were finding their way to the free clinic where they were diagnosed with diseases that were so old, they disappeared so long ago that they didn't even have Latin names. I mean, they were the grunge and the rot and they were these horrible things. And little by little, they had to find their way back to modern hygiene. He called this the great relearning. This is what happens when, and this was an extreme, preposterous example, but I think it applies to a lot of things we do in society, and I've seen it in my lifetime as things that are just known. They're just things your mother should have told you. And now we have a society where we're sort of not passing along basic information. The basic, what we've learned a few things from, several generations, 1,000 of human history. We've philosophical, psychological, we have knowledge, we have wisdom, but we're a generation that's afraid to pass it on with any confidence. And so I say to you is that you're, the beneficiaries of a society where you're very free to explore and develop yourself, but one thing that you may have been deprived of is this sort of wisdom of the ages, this common sense. And I urge you to listen. It's probably, that voice is probably in you, and to listen to it and be open to it, and let the great relearning begin. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick?
Yeah, I'll be brief. I think the biggest advice or wisdom I guess I can offer is just give each other a chance. I know a theology professor who teaches a class on my alma mater who, when they're doing the unit on the theology of marriage, he assigns extra credit if the students ask each other on a date. I don't know if that's a policy I would assign to Cornerstone University or not. It's creative. And if incentive,
we have
people
some of
respond,
our deans and faculty here. We'll connect with you on that, Patrick.
It's a creative incentive, and people respond to incentives. And I know there are at least some marriages that came out of that class. So, but it points to the fact that every institution that touches the lives of students has an ability to shape them, and whether that's pointing them towards career or family or faith or whatever values that they come into it, they're always different when they come out. And so the extent that institutions can take that charge seriously, like places like Cornerstone do, there's a lot of colleges that don't. But when it's time, and when you get asked out, say yes. Or if you think, she's kind of cute, just ask her out. Don't set the bar so high, because if you're waiting for Mr. Perfect, maybe he'll come along, and that's great, and mazel tov. But maybe you also 5 years later, you would have grown together, become something closer to Mr. Perfect. I think there's a hesitation that it has to be perfect off the bat, otherwise it's not worth my time. But sometimes you just got to give them a chance.
There you go. Wow, I love that. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Exactly.
When I think of wisdom of the ages, I first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes baby in the baby carriage.
You heard it first on Wisdom Conversations.
My parents were married for 48 years before my dad passed away, and they started life together in Jamaica, West Indies. My dad used to pick my mom up for their dates on horseback. It was very romantic. He then went to England to study, started missing my mom, wrote for her hand in marriage back in Jamaica, and her parents, worried, and they said yes. And my mom, at 19 years old, took a boat 5,000 miles away to go see Vincent, and they joined together and they got married, and they started this great adventure together of a life that they could never imagine embarking upon the things that they did without one another. And I would just say, don't deprive yourself of that opportunity.
Thank you, Ian. Beautiful. Thank you. Catalina.
And they did a beautiful thing, you see.
Well, you should see my brother. But,
Do you have a brother, Ian?
I do have a brother.
Oh, okay. Just want to
I'm
make sure.
just joking. I know this is on video. I'm just joking.
He's noting right now, exactly for December, for the list of December. Yeah. So that message for these students, you guys are perfect the way you are. Do not allow anyone to convince you the opposite. Is a difficult time to be in that age because you are learning, you are preparing, you are working hard. At the same time, you want to do so many things, but focus on one. And it's to find a purpose. And do not forget what the Lord tells you. It's obviously, there is 10 commandments. It's very easy. One of them I think is very important is honor your mom and dad. You're going to text after this event your mom, your dad, and you are going to say, thank you for everything you do for my life. And I am really telling you how much I love you and how lucky I am. Because of you, I'm here, and because all your sacrifices, because you cannot imagine. Only when you become parent, you understand what is become a parent. It's a lot of sacrifices. It's a lot of, later I'm going to do it for me, and first is my kid. You became a priority for your parent, and that's why you're lucky enough to be here. So other thing is become a blessing every day to the life of someone. You can become that blessing. You can become this smile to somebody who doesn't expect that smile, or this beautiful word for a girl who doesn't receive any compliments, or something. Open that door to someone who at that moment doesn't expect. So I think you, the grown-ups here, that they are not students, you need to support students. It's hard at age, so we need to keep understand and remembering at that moment when we were so confused, especially by the world. Do not allow a politician to choose your life. Either become a leader, even become very bold on your values, on your beliefs, and just keep looking for your purpose in life. It's the politicians, not all are good in this country, unfortunately, not even some in the Republican Party, because it's not because you are part of one party that you are going to be a good politician. But you're smart. That's why you are here in a university and have this discernment to understand and choose what is good, have discipline, have pursue something constantly, because you are going to do your life, you are shaping your life from now, and you have this power to shape society too.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panelists for a wonderful conversation. Thank you.